This paper focuses on Brazilian science fiction films that somehow elaborate on the crossroads between dystopian settings, inspired by the current political agenda in Brazil, and the digital melting pot that includes social networks and hacker culture. Therefore, the films here discussed provide case studies for this present reflection upon how contemporary science fiction cinema has been instrumental to the critique of the extreme right, the long-lasting history of social inequality and the legacy of slavery in Brazil. The economic and political backlash translated into a detour to the extreme right in Brazil coincide with several science fiction films focusing on cyberspace, hacktivism, and digital media turned into weapons of mass destruction and brainwashing. The election of Donald Trump in the US, followed by Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, has set the worst-case scenarios explored by these films, digital dystopias where social media and media corporations strongly back authoritarian governments and a police state that holds sway over entire nations. The hybrid warfare in Brazil, in which the criminal use of big data, fake news, social media, bots, and all kinds of illegal measures and artifices in favor of the empowerment of an extreme right government is thus the backdrop of Brazilian science fiction shorts that elaborate on the role of minorities, intellectuals and artists in a dystopian mediascape, a Digystopian peripheral world. A film that may have inaugurated this front was Adrilho Queiroza's White Out, Black In. Queiroza's film can be seen as a daring case of cinematic circuit bending, subverting the established policies of state funding and endowment for the arts in Brazil, primarily based on laws regulating fiscal exemption. The idea of circuit bending pervades the film on several levels, starting with the fact that it is a hybrid of documentary and SF film, made with public funds granted explicitly to documentary filmmaking. Circuit bending as a leitmotif can also be seen in the main characters Marquim and Sartana. Marquim works on a sonic bomb that circuit bends popular culture by weaponizing peripheral music and voices. At a certain point in the film, Sartana takes his prosthetic leg to a hacker, so he gets better performance from the mechanical limb. This scene represents how the less privileged people may sometimes get some benefit from the digital world. Shaquito, the actor who plays the role of Sartana, actually had his leg amputated due to an accident while playing soccer. The prosthetic leg Sartana uses in the film is genuine. It was given to him as a beta test, and the leg compiles data on his walking and general usage. The idea of portraying him as a cyborg who seeks a hacker to hack his leg came from that actual scenario. Sartana was one of the test subjects of that specific model of a prosthetic leg. A more recent short film inspired by the current state of political affairs in Brazil, the detour to the extreme right, and the impact of big data, biometrics, and new digital technologies on our ordinary lives is Julio Urbano's 2030. The film is about a mysterious blackout in São Paulo, the most technologically advanced city in the country, generating a wave of protests and operational problems that unleash hell in the metropolis. As she requests a ride on her app, Deborah is surprised to find a special agent inside her ordered self-driven vehicle. In this short trip, certain events reveal who are the true enemies in a highly watched society. In 2030, the dystopian city under siege trope is metonymically subsumed to a car interior, while a futurist version of an Uber driver serves a client. The two characters, Deborah and the agent, end up stuck in a traffic jam due to power shortages that affected the AI in charge of urban circulation. However, towards the end of the trip, off-screen sounds and confusing commands from the AI make characters suspect that a confrontation is taking place on the streets, with soldiers shooting to kill the rebels. Entirely filmed in a single, internal location in the guise of a futurist car with no windows and no view of the surroundings, the film alludes to a dystopian police state based on strict surveillance and ideological grip. Clayton Xavier, Clara Chroma and Orlik Sombra's feature film Rodson, or Where the Sun Has No Mercy is a psychedelic SF road movie shot in the northeastern state of Ceará, Brazil. In this future, near the turn of the 22nd century, reading is forbidden and any kind of art is considered a crime. Only mass production and consumption are allowed. Rodson is a young man who feels like a misfit in a repressive society controlled by the anarcho-neo-Pentecostal government, a theocratic police state. His creative mind then conceives the robot Caleb, Rodson's alter ego that takes him on an adventurous journey. Along the way, they meet good citizens like the Brazilian traditional middle-class family, the sadomasochistic police, the militia, a TV pastor, and the digital influencer Evie Topstar. Eventually, Rodson finds the rebel leader Cavalona de Savada and her cyborg gang, the system's most wanted public enemies. In the end, Rodson finds refuge in another dimension. In this film, the ludic, carnivalesque, and chaotic narrative inherent to experimental cinema's usual iconoclasm is catalyzed by electronic music, circuit bending, and contemporary hacker culture. With several touches of eschatology, Rodson also represents the basura punk aesthetics in which trash is resignified by peripheral hackers. To some extent, it reminds us of artistic collectives such as Gambiologia, the Brazilian group based in the state of Minas Gerais. The Gambiologists define their movement as art, design, technology, invention, reuse, education, with a Tupiniquim accent. Despite its apparent fun, irreverent and hallucinatory aesthetics, Rodson does bring about an avalanche of criticism against Brazil's current state of affairs, targeting people and institutions like the Brazilian middle class, the neo-Pentecostal movement, and the authoritarianism that has spread over Brazilian society in the last few years. Another northeastern post-apocalyptic short film that could be cited with Rodson is Julia da Costa and Renata Morao's Abjataz 288. In Abjataz's dystopian future, Joana and Valenza take a journey adrift through the periphery of Aracaju, the capital of the northeastern state of Sergipe. Inspired by electronic music and a noisy soundtrack, the characters keep walking on the streets while performing what they feel like misfits in a repressive society. Abjataz 288 tackles issues as varied as gender and meritocracy, all with an ironic tone and using symbolic elements that refer to the popular history of Aracaju. Another good example of Brazilian digital dystopia with a more assertive Afrofuturist approach is Rissandra Leone Blackout. In a futuristic Rio de Janeiro, nothing seems to have changed since the early 21st century. Abuse of authority, violations of civil rights, racism, and sexism still set the tone for the clash between public authorities and the people in the favelas. This time, however, something seems to be on the brink of change. Somewhat inspired by the Wachowski brothers' The Matrix, the surveillance technology targeted at poor black people starts glitching in Blackout. A black hacktivist woman appears to have found ways to circumvent the system, circuit bend it, and fight back. Thus the film features a preamble to a near future in which cyberactivism can finally undermine the long-lasting history of inequality and violence against the African Brazilian population. But the best representative of cinematic elaboration on current Brazilian politics and digital dystopias is Thiago Foresti's short film Algorithm, a dystopian speculation about a near future in which the police state restricts rights, harasses, hunts, and eliminates political dissidents. Young people who venture into critical and libertarian thinking simply by reading subversive works and participating in political discussions about the system thus become preferential targets for the police state that benefits from a powerful algorithm. The film's plot is perhaps not so distant from our present reality. Algorithm reminds us of classical works such as George Orwell's novel 1984 and its adaptations for film and television. Films such as Grayish Morning, by Olney Sao Paulo, or Punishment Park, by Peter Watkins also seem to be part of this cinematographic breeding ground from which Foresti's algorithm arises. As Eric Dufour timely recalls, quote, "The camera that observes and controls people is a constant in cinema interested in totalitarian societies or the totalitarian transformation of society. We have seen how L'Œil du Mal provides a very contemporary image of surveillance. Television screens are everywhere in 1984, by Michael Radford, and in Brazil, by Terry Gilliam, where the camera's eye that records everything appears recurrently and obsessively. In 1984 we see this eye that watches people even at home and from which Winston Smith tries to escape. In George Lucas's THX 1138, that eye that neither the characters nor the viewer see is manifested by the omnipresence of a voice that addresses individuals when they are at home, to direct their behavior as traffic is directed, with slogans that play a musical leitmotif, "What's wrong?" This question appears when someone does not do what is expected. Unquote. Anyhow, Algorithm goes far beyond the camera as an icon of totalitarian surveillance. The film summarizes, in effect, a situation of constant multimodal and multimedia surveillance, where all communication tools can be used and repurposed in favor of omnipresent observation and ideological control. And yet, Algorithm does not appear to offer a radically different scenario from our current perceptions. The film just slightly extrapolates the current state of the art in terms of surveillance technologies. Algorithm further reverberates the current phenomena of social networks and illegal data mining. The film reminds us of Cambridge Analytica and the elections in Brazil and other countries between 2016 and 2018 and the rise of police corporate states based on unlimited surveillance, as reported by Shoshana Zuboff in Jeff Orlovsky's documentary The Social Dilemma.
It began online, as you all know, but it now reaches far beyond online. Who's got an Alexa in their kitchen? Who's got a TV that listens? Who's walking down the street not only passing the CCTV cameras, which are public sector, but the tech companies have fought for the right to be able to take our faces from any public space without our ever knowing. Forget about consent, forget about the right to combat. So now these data are being amassed. They are valued for their rich predictive signals. They are shunted into complex supply chains of data flows. They are conveyed, picture those old-fashioned conveyor belts, conveying them right into a factory. But what is this factory? It's a computational factory. It's called AI, artificial intelligence. But like any factory, it makes products.
In this sense, the vigilant dystopia described by algorithm seems to echo Jean-Pierre Vernon's idea of totalitarianization. Éric Dufour later took up this concept in his History of Science Fiction Cinema. According to Dufour, quote, "In short, the totalitarian society that we must fear today is perhaps not that of fascism, Nazism, or the different forms of communist societies after the Second World War, but that of our liberal democratic societies, much more discreet because it does not present itself as such, and because it is not a proven fact, but a process that is set in motion, which is why it is better to speak of totalitarianismization than of totalitarianism. Totalitarianismization is based on the installation of techniques and devices that we can approve all the more as they seem, in a certain way and from a certain point of view, to favor our autonomy and facilitate and improve our daily life. On the other hand, and from another angle, these techniques establish control of the individual who, in this sense, can no longer dispose of himself insofar as he is instrumentalized by a device in whose installation he participated." Unquote. Nevertheless, algorithm engenders an outcome that beckons with resistance, possibly inspired by the contemporary hacktivism of organizations like Pirate Bay or young activists like Alexandra Elbakyan, programmer and creator of the Sci-Hub website. Elbakyan fights the capitalist voracity of the scientific publishing market giants, like Elsevier, through her work of free and wide dissemination of scientific knowledge. Algorithm is also contemporary with the polemics involving the Brazilian government and its alleged interest in purchasing the highly controversial Israeli spy technology called Pegasus, a software able to stealthily break into mobile phones and other equipment with extreme ease and effectiveness. The Pegasus technology might well be the last lifeboat for Bolsonaro and his sinister intention to remain in power, regardless of the 2022 elections, the investigations about him and his family, and the charges of genocide that pile upon him. Unlike all the aforementioned short films in this paper, Algorithm uses an exciting narrative strategy. It does not set the dystopian scenario in the most usual, objective camera work and mise-en-scène. Rather, it disguises the third-person mode of narration by offering a subjective camera or privileged point of view instead. The whole story unfolds within the spy technology interface, and the usual identification provoked by young characters, the heroes in the story, is later compromised by the appearance of off-screen voices. The special agent's voices off-screen coincide with the spectator's point of view through the surveillance apparatus. We, the viewers, then feel the discontent of being hunter and prey, hero and villain, young rebel and authoritarian bureaucrat at the same time. This play with the point of view shot and the clever production design and cinematography, keeping the whole storytelling inside the box, through the interface of the surveillance software, adds further layers to this film. The pleasures of voyeurism are under scrutiny once again. Before Algorithm, Tiago Foresti had already directed a breathtaking mix of documentary and science fiction, Space Invasion, a short film screened in both Brazilian and international film festivals that won important awards in Brazil. Finally, in films like Algorithm and 2030, the idea of a city under siege with citizens constantly monitored by invaders or the authoritarian state appears to evoke previous science fiction feature films from Brazil and Argentina, like Alberto Pieralisi's The Fifth Power, Hugo Santiago's Invasion, and Fernando Spiner's The Sleepwalker, to name just a few. Thiago Foresti's Algorithm and Julio Urbano's 2030 are among the most potent cinematic symptoms of Brazil's civilizational backlash and tense political situation over the last 3 years.